I have told this story only twice before, and both times to men who did not believe me. They thought I was making a legend the way a soldier makes a legend out of his own defeat, to give the defeat a shape he can live beside. They are wrong. I am not making her larger so that I can be smaller. She was already larger than anything I had been taught to fear, and I had been taught to fear a great deal. My name does not matter to you. Where I learned my trade does not matter either, except that I learned it well, on ranges and in hills on the far side of the world from where I am writing this, under instructors who measured a man by the second decimal of a distance and threw away the men who could not hold it. I was good. I will say that plainly, because the rest of what I have to tell you only means something if you understand that I was good, that I knew exactly what a precision rifle could and could not do at the edge of its envelope, that I had killed men past 1,000 meters and walked away unbothered by it, and that on the night I am going to describe to you, I was the most dangerous shooter in that valley by every measure I had ever been given. I was the second most dangerous shooter in that valley. The first was a woman whose name I never learned, whose face I saw only once and only for an instant, lit blue-white by a flare against a wall of falling snow, and whose call sign I learned the way you learn the name of the thing that is killing your friends in the dark, slowly, from the mouths of frightened men, passed up the net in pieces until it arrived whole and cold. Whitehorn. They said it the way you say a curse you only half believe in. By the second hour I believed in it completely. Let me tell you about the cold first, because the cold is the floor under everything else, and if you do not feel the cold, you will not understand why what she did was not possible. We were at altitude, in a country of stone teeth and high white bowls where the wind came off the ice fields with nothing to break it for 40 kilometers, and on the night of the siege the temperature fell past anything my gloves were built for and kept falling. Snow came in sideways, dry and small and hard as sand, the kind that does not soften the world but scours it. In that kind of cold, a rifle is no longer the simple machine you trained on. The lubricant thickens. The metal contracts. The first round out of a frozen barrel does not go where the cold barrel and the warm barrel sent the others. A shooter who does not know this misses, and a shooter who does know it corrects for it and still flinches at the difference. The mirage you read in heat to judge the wind is gone. You read the wind off snow streamers and the bend of dead grass and the burn on your own cheek, and at distance the wind is never one wind but four, layered through the bowl like currents in dark water, and a bullet must pass through all of them. The breath fogs and freezes on the scope glass. The body shakes and you must steal the shot from between the shakes. The fingers go and you warm them one at a time, so that the trigger finger, at least, will still tell you the truth about the pressure it is giving. I am telling you these things so that you will know I am not a man who is easily impressed by a long shot. I have made long shots. I have watched the best men I ever trained with make long shots and miss long shots, and I know to the marrow of me how thin the margin is between the two, even on a warm, still morning, with a spotter calling your wind and a flat range laid out in front of you like a tablecloth. She did it 19 times. In that, at night, alone, off a hide she had chosen and ranged and prepared, while my side and her own side both thought she was nothing, while the very men she would save that night were laughing at her over a small iron stove a day before they walked into the ring I helped close around them. 19. I counted. That was my job after the first hour, to count, to find the pattern, to find the shooter. I am the man who can tell you it was 19 and not 18 and not 20, because each one took something from my side of the valley and I was keeping the ledger. When it was over I had a number and no shooter, and an understanding that has not left me in all the years since, which is this, that I had spent my whole life learning to be a weapon, and that night I met someone who had learned to be something rarer and worse to stand against, which is a person who has made herself entirely equal to a single hard task and emptied out everything else. But I have started in the middle, the way frightened men do. Let me go back one day, to the iron stove and the laughter, because I was not there, but I learned every word of it later, from a prisoner and from a radio log, and from the kind of reconstruction that men in my old profession do when they need to understand the thing that beat them. I have put it together until I can see it as if I had been standing in the corner of that hut. Maybe I have made one or two small things up to join the true things. The shape is true. I would stake the rest of my life on the shape. The staging hut sat at the mouth of the high valley, a stone shepherd's house with a tin roof and a stove that ticked, and into it that afternoon came a team of operators waiting on whether to push up to the saddle. They were good men. I want to say that clearly, because it would be easier for you to forgive them if they were fools, and they were not fools. They were the kind of men my own instructors would have respected, hard, trained, bonded, casually lethal, the sort who have been the most dangerous people in every room they have entered since they were young, and have stopped noticing that they expect to be. And attached to them for that operation, sent up by some office far below with a single line on the manifest and no explanation, was a woman. She was older than them. Not old, but older, with gray coming in at the temples of her dark hair and a stillness on her that the young ones read as tiredness. She wore the same cold-weather kit they did, scrubbed of markings, and she carried a long case she did not open in front of them, and she said almost nothing, and she did the thing that quiet, competent people do in a room full of loud, competent people, which is to become, to that room, a kind of furniture. They did not know what she was. The manifest did not say. The office that sent her did not say, because the office that sent her never said. That was the whole point of her. And so, in the way of men who are bored and cold and waiting, and a little keyed up for the work ahead, they began to make a game of her. It started small, the way it always does. One of the younger ones, I learned later they called him Royce, a sergeant, broad and quick to laugh and not a bad man. Only a man who had never in his life been the one underestimated asked her, friendly enough, what she was along to do. She said she was the shooter. The hut got a particular quality of quiet, the quiet of men deciding whether something is a joke. Then Royce laughed because the alternative to laughing was rude, and asked her what she shot. And she said, a rifle, and that small flat answer, not clever, not warm, just true and closed, was the spark. Because to a room of men whose whole identity is built on the rifle, a quiet older woman saying she is the shooter, the way you might say you are the driver, is either a tremendous claim or a tremendous misunderstanding, and they had already decided, the moment she came in with the gray at her temples and the long case and the silence, which of the two it had to be. The shooter, Royce said, turning it over for the room. We've got a few of those. There was a man named Petty who I think of as the one who turned the game cruel, though I am told he would have said he was only keeping things light. He asked to see her qualification card. I should explain, for those of you who have never worn the uniform, that a card like that is a small bureaucratic thing, a record of where on the long ladder of marksmanship a soldier has been certified to stand. It is the kind of document you are issued and forget. No serious shooter carries his identity in it. The card is the floor of a thing, not the ceiling. To ask a master for her qualification card is like asking a surgeon to show you the certificate that says he passed anatomy in his first year. It is not an insult on its face. It becomes an insult in the asking, in the grin, in the passing of it around the stove. And she gave it to him. That is the part I have turned over the most, in the years since, the part I understand now and did not understand then. She reached into her kit and produced the card and handed it across without a word. And I have come to believe she did it not out of meekness, but out of an economy so total that she would not spend a single ounce of herself on a fight that did not matter, and that this thing the room read as weakness, was the same quality that would let her lie motionless in 8 inches of snow for 9 hours and steal 19 shots from between her own shivers. The room saw a woman who would not stand up for herself. I see now, a person who had decided long ago exactly what was worth standing up for, and had taken everything else off the scale. Petty read the card. Whatever was on it, and I have wondered, I think it must have been ordinary, the deliberate ordinary of a record kept thin on purpose. He read it aloud in a voice pitched for the room, and the room laughed, and he asked her, would she read it herself, for the record, her classification, so they'd all know who they had with them. And she looked at him for a moment with eyes that one of the survivors much later described to me as weak tea, pale, mild, giving nothing, and she read it. Her own classification, aloud, flat, to a room of men laughing at her. You will want her to have refused. I wanted her to have refused, the first time I heard it. But I have come to think the reading was the most frightening thing she did all day, more frightening than any of the 19, because it was the act of a person to whom the laughter was simply weather, the act of someone so far beyond the need for their respect that she could hand them the rope and let them think they had taken something from her. A person like that has no handle on the outside for you to grab. I spent a whole night that next day reaching for a handle on her and finding only cold. Royce, to his small credit, felt the thing tip past funny. I am told he said, all right, and tried to fold it shut. But Petty was enjoying himself, and the captain, a man named Hale, who commanded them and who I will come back to, because his is the face at the end of this story, the captain let it run. He did not start it, and he did not laugh the loudest, but he was the one with the authority to stop it, and he did not stop it, and that is its own kind of act. He watched a master read her card to a laughing room, and he let it go because it was easier than the small awkwardness of ending it. And that failure to spend a little awkwardness would cost him a night of his life he has never gotten back. Petty took her card and, grinning, pinned it to the corkboard by the door where the duty rosters hung, as if it were a notice, as if she were a notice. There, he said, now it's official. And the laughter came again, easier now, the laughter of a thing that has been made safe. Then they gave her the assignment that was the real insult, the one dressed as a courtesy. Hale told her kindly, I am told, which is the worst way, that since she was attached and not organic to the team, she would take the overwatch hide up on the north shoulder and hold there while the team did the work in the bowl. Stay put. Stay warm as she could. Keep eyes out. And Petty, who could not let a thing lie, added the line that I have heard 3 different men repeat to me word for word, because it is the line the whole night answered. Just count snowflakes for us, sweetheart. We'll handle the war. She did not answer that either. She took her long case and she went out into the cold to find her hide, and the door banged behind her in the wind. And inside the hut the stove ticked, and the men went back to being the most dangerous people in the room. And not one of them, not Royce, not Petty, not Hale, understood that the most dangerous person in that valley had just walked out into the snow to begin her work, and that her work had in fact begun 3 days earlier, and that they were already, all of them, alive on credit. She was extending them without their knowing it. Because here is what she had been doing while they thought she was nothing. I reconstructed this part later too, from her hide, from the things she left, from the marks on the snow that had not yet been covered when my people finally reached the position. She had not arrived green into that valley the day of the staging. She had been up on that north shoulder before, on 2 separate nights in the days prior, alone, while the team was still staging and laughing, slipping up in the dark, lying in the cold, and doing the only thing that mattered, which is the thing that cannot be done in the moment and must be done in advance. She had learned the ground. She had ranged the bowl. Every shooter knows that the single hardest thing about a shot is not the trigger but the distance, and that distance in broken country at night is a liar. The eye cannot be trusted, and the laser that reads it for you is a small bright machine that a watching enemy can sometimes see. So she had not trusted her eye, and she had not relied on the machine. She had gone out in daylight from the hide and ranged everything, every rock, every fold, every likely place a man would stand or crouch or run, the mouth of the bowl, the goat track, the old stone walls of the ruined fold at the saddle, and she had built herself a map not of where things were but of how far they were, a card of ranges that she carried behind her eyes so that on the night, in the dark, in the snow, she would not need to range a single thing. She would already know. A man would step into a place and she would not measure him. she would recognize the place and recall the number. That is the difference between a good shooter and what she was. The good shooter solves the problem fast. She had refused to have the problem. She had logged the wind, too, over those nights and that day. Not the wind as a single fact, but the wind as a system, where it accelerated through the throat of the bowl and where it died in the lee of the east wall, and how it shifted when the sun left the rock, so that she could hold not for the wind she felt on her cheek, but for the wind the bullet would actually fly through 200 meters down rain, where her cheek could feel nothing at all. And she had cached. This is the detail that tells me, more than any other, who I was up against. A lesser shooter, even a very good one, carries her ammunition with her and shoots until it is gone. She had thought past the first fight to the long one. In the days before, she had moved up the shoulder and left ammunition in 3 small caches at points she might fall back to, wrapped against the wet, so that if the hide was found and she had to move, and she would have to move, she had planned to move. She had chosen her fallbacks the way she chose everything, in advance. She would not be moving toward empty. She had built herself a position with depth. She had, in effect, decided the shape of a battle that had not started yet, against an enemy that had not arrived yet, on behalf of men who were at that moment pinning her qualification card to a board and laughing. That is what Count Snowflakes walked out into. I want to be fair to the cold facts, so I will tell you that none of this was magic and none of it was luck, and I will keep telling you that, because the easy way to hear this story is as a miracle and the easy way is a lie. There was no miracle. There was a person who had spent 20 years becoming equal to exactly this, and who had then done the unglamorous, invisible patient work, the wrangling, the logging, the caching, the choosing of fallbacks, that the work in the bowl would later seem to have skipped, because it had all been done in advance where no one could see it and clap. The men in the hut would, by dawn, believe they had been saved by something impossible. They had been saved by something the opposite of impossible. They had been saved by the most ordinary thing in the world done at a level so far past them that it looked, from where they stood, like a god reaching into the valley. The patience was not the part before the work. The patience was the work. I did not understand that sentence the night I first felt its edge against my throat. I understand it now. It is the truest thing I know about my old trade, and I learned it from a woman who read her own card, aloud to a laughing room, and then went out and quietly got ready to keep them all alive. The weather that had pinned everyone broke toward evening, not into clear, but into the moving kind of bad weather that a force like mine waits for, because it blinds the aircraft that would otherwise own the sky and turns a fight back into a thing of men and rifles and ground. My commander had been waiting days for exactly that sky. We had watched the staging hut. We knew the team would push up into the bowl when the aircraft were blind, because that was the soundest time to move, and these were sound men. And sound men are the easiest of all to trap, because soundness is predictable. The bowl above the saddle was a perfect ring, high walls on 3 sides, a single throat in, old shepherd's walls for us to fight from, and we had walked it and ranged it ourselves, or thought we had, and we had set our positions on the high ground all around its rim, more than 40 of us, with good shooters among us and machine guns sighted to sweep the floor, and we had left the throat open like a held breath. They came up in the last blue light with the snow starting again, moving well, spread and silent. Hale's team flowing up the goat track into the bowl exactly as sound men should, exactly as we needed them to. I was on the east rim with my rifle and my spotter, a young man named Karim who I will mention again and wish I did not have to, and I watched the team come into the ring through my scope, and I felt the old clean certainty of a thing about to go entirely our way. They were in the bottom of a bowl. We were on the rim, all around in the dark in numbers, with the throat ready to close behind them. By every rule I had ever been taught, they were already dead and only the formality remained. I had counted the team. I had counted, I thought, everyone. I had not counted the north shoulder, because the north shoulder was above and behind the lip, outside the ring, a place of no tactical value to a force coming up the track, a place you would only choose if you were not coming to fight in the bowl at all, but to own it from outside, which is a thought that belongs to a different and rarer kind of mind than the 40 of us on the rim possessed that night. There was nothing on the north shoulder that mattered to men like us. There was a woman up there in 8 inches of snow with a map of ranges behind her eyes, who had been lying still and cold and patient for 3 hours already, watching us set every one of our positions, marking each one against the card in her memory, waiting. Not for permission, not for orders, not for the team below to need her, but for the precise moment when need and readiness and the ground all came together into a single shot she had effectively already taken 3 days before, and only had now to release. The throat closed. My commander gave the order. The first of our machine guns opened up across the floor of the bowl, and the team below broke for the only cover there was, the low stone of the ruined fold, and the ring of us on the rim leaned into our rifles to begin the killing, and the trap that could not fail began, on schedule to fail. The first shot came out of the snow above and behind us, from the one direction none of us were watching, and it did not sound like the start of anything. It was a single flat crack swallowed almost at once by the wind, lost under our own guns. I would not even have marked it as separate if I had not, in the same half-second, seen what it did. On the south rim, almost directly across the bowl from me, one of our best machine gun positions, the gun that was doing the most work, sweeping the fold where the team had gone to ground, simply stopped. The gun stopped, and the man behind it was no longer behind it, and the assistant gunner beside him was turning to look at his partner with the particular jerk of a man who does not yet understand what he has just seen. And then that man too was flung back from the gun and did not come forward again, and the gun sat silent and slewed in the snow with no one to feed it. 2 shots. I had heard at most the edge of one. Across the bowl, into the wind, in falling snow, in the dark, from a direction I had not even placed yet, 2 men off the most important gun on the field before the rest of us had finished leaning into our rifles. I remember the exact feeling, and I will be honest about it because the honesty is the whole point of my telling you this. It was not fear, not yet. It was confusion of a deep and specific kind, the confusion of an expert watching something happen inside his own area of expertise that his expertise says cannot happen. I knew, instantly and in my body, the difficulty of the shot I had just seen taken. I knew the range across that bowl. We had ranged it. I had the number. And I knew the wind in the throat, and I knew the cold, and I knew the dark, and I knew the snow. And I knew that the shot I had just watched land was at the bleeding edge of what the finest shooter I had ever personally known could do on his best day with a spotter and a warm rifle and the sun up. And it had just been taken twice, in 4 seconds, off a moving gun crew, in the worst conditions I had ever fought in, from the one piece of ground I had written off as worthless. Karim beside me had seen it too. He looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not have the words yet. Neither did I across the bowl. Our trap was still closing, our other guns were still firing. The night was still, by every visible measure, ours. But I had just felt the floor of my certainty move, the way you feel a great weight shift somewhere below you in a ship, before any alarm, when only your body knows that something has changed and the change is bad. I put my eye back to my scope, and I began, for the first time in many years, to hunt something I was afraid of. The net on my side came alive the way a hive comes alive when something has struck it. Not at first with information, but with noise, men keying their radios over each other. The gunner's partner on the south rim screaming for someone to take the gun, voices asking where did it come from, and no 2 of them agreeing. That is the first thing a single hidden shooter does to a larger force, and she did it perfectly, though I would not understand for another hour that she was doing it on purpose. She did not announce herself. She did not fire a flurry. She took 2 men off the one gun that mattered most, and then she went silent and let our own confusion do half her work. Because 40 frightened men who do not know where the death is coming from, will tear at the dark in every wrong direction and exhaust themselves, and give their positions away by their muzzle flashes. And she lay still in the snow and watched them do it and made her short list. My commander was a brave and competent man, and his instinct was the correct instinct for the enemy he thought he had. He believed one of the team below had broken contact and flanked us up onto high ground, a lone operator gone hunting, and he ordered a section off the rim to sweep the slope toward the sound. It was the right order for the wrong picture. He was looking for a man who had come up from the bowl. He was sending men down and across toward where they thought the shot had originated, which was already not where she was, because the second principle she fought by, I learned it as the night taught it to me, was that she never fired twice from a place that could be reached by the men her firing had angered. The shot located her, so the shot was also the order to move. She fired and she displaced, fired and displaced, and the section my commander sent to sweep her arrived, cold and strung out and afraid, at an empty scrape in the snow with 2 warm casings in it, and a sight line to the next dead man already opening somewhere off to their flank. I did not join that sweep. I want to be honest about why. I told myself it was because my position on the east rim was too valuable to abandon, that someone of my skill should hold the high overwatch and find the shooter by patience rather than chase her by boot. That was true, and it was also a coward's truth, a true thing I was using to cover a thing I did not want to look at, which was that some animal part of me had already understood from those first 2 shots that whatever was up on that shoulder was not a man gone hunting and was not in my class of problem, and that the men sweeping toward it were walking, though they did not know it, into the hands of something that had ranged the ground they were crossing days ago, and was simply waiting for them to enter the numbers it already held. She let the sweep get close. That was the third thing I learned about her, and it was the cruelest. She did not fire on the section while they were far and moving fast and hard to hit. She let them come up the slope toward her empty hide, let them slow and bunch at the broken ground near where the casings were, let them gather at the place their own logic had brought them to. And then, from a new position off their flank that they had walked past without seeing, she took the lead man, and as the rest froze and turned toward that shot she took the second. And as they went down into the snow and began to fire wildly at the muzzle flash that was no longer there, she had already shifted again, and was waiting for the next man to lift his head. 3 men in that sweep, from 3 positions, in perhaps 90 seconds. And the survivors came back up over the rim white-faced and emptied of all their courage, and they could not tell my commander what they had seen because they had not seen anything. They had seen snow. They had seen their friends fall. They had fired a great deal of ammunition into the dark at nothing. That is what it is to be hunted by someone who has made the ground itself her ally. You do not fight her. You fight the places she has decided you will be, and you lose before you find her. Down in the bowl, meanwhile, the thing she had truly come to do was happening, and it took me too long to see it, because I was looking up the slope at the duel forming between her and us, and not down at the floor where the team was supposed to be dying. They were not dying. The trap had been built to kill them with the converging fire of guns and good shooters from the rim, and one by one the guns and the good shooters on the rim were being taken out of the fight, not at random, but in an order, and the order was the cold reading of a master who had decided which of our positions most endangered the men in the fold and was removing them by priority. The south gun first, because it had the best angle into the fold. Then a marksman we had on the west rim who had begun to find the range on the men behind the stone. She took him second, I am almost certain, because he was the next most dangerous thing to the team. Then the gun we tried to bring up to replace the south gun, taken before it fired a full belt. She was not killing my men for the sake of killing my men. She was disassembling the trap from the outside, piece by priority piece, keeping a roof of overwatch fire off the 11 men in the fold so that they could live and reorganize, and start a fight back up out of the bowl. Every shot did 2 things at once. It removed one of our weapons and it told the surrounded team, in a language only soldiers under fire fully understand. You are not alone. Someone has eyes on you. Someone is on the high ground keeping the worst of it off your head's hold. I have to tell you now about the radio log, because there is a record of what those men in the fold understood and when they understood it, and it is the part of this story that undoes me a little even now. For the first stretch of the fight, the team's net was what any team's net is in an ambush: terse, disciplined, men calling contacts and casualties and reorganizing under a captain's voice. Hale was steady. I will give him that. Pinned in a hole he had been led into, he ran his men like the professional he was, and they began the brutal arithmetic of fighting up out of a kill zone. But somewhere in the first 20 minutes, the tone of the log changes, and you can hear in it the moment the team begins to notice that the fire from the rim is not behaving the way encircling fire is supposed to behave, that it is thinning in a pattern, that the guns that should be grinding them down keep going abruptly silent, that something is happening to the enemy on the heights that is not them doing it. There is a transmission in the log from one of the team. They think it was Royce, the sergeant who had laughed first and tried to stop it last, and it is just 5 words, and they are the 5 words I would put on the stone if it were mine to write. He says, "Someone's shooting for us. North." North, the shoulder, the hide, the place they had sent her to count snowflakes. And Hale's voice comes back on the log after a pause, and the man who had let the joke run says one word, and the word is her assignment turned into a question, and an apology and a prayer all at once. He says, "Overwatch." And then there is a long stretch where no one says her call sign, because no one yet knows she has one, because to them she is still the attached woman they benched, and you can hear the team beginning to fight differently, beginning to trust the high ground at their backs, beginning to move when the rim went quiet because they had learned that the rim went quiet because she was making it quiet. A team that should have been annihilated in the first 10 minutes was, by the 30-minute mark, maneuvering, because someone they had laughed at was lying in the snow above them spending herself to buy them the seconds. Up on my rim, I had stopped trying to direct the fight and had given myself over entirely to the hunt, because I had understood by then that the fight would be decided by whether anyone could find and kill the shooter on the shoulder, and that I was the only one on my side with the skill to do it. So I did what she was doing. I stopped reacting and I started reading. I lay still and I watched the shoulder, and I tried to think the way she thought, to range the ground she had to be using, to find the handful of places that gave a sight line into the bowl and the slope at once and were defensible and had covered approaches and fallbacks, to find, in other words, the small number of places a master would choose, because a master's freedom is an illusion. The ground only offers a few good answers, and the better the shooter, the more surely you can predict which one she will take, if you are good enough yourself to see them. I found 3 candidate positions. I was proud of that, in the cold, sick way you can still feel pride while you are losing. 3 places, and I set my scope on the best of the 3 and I waited for a flash, because even she had to make heat and light when she fired, and a flash at night is a confession. She did not flash. That was the next thing, the thing that told me her equipment as well as her skill was beyond what we faced from regular soldiers. She was running a suppressor, and I think subsonic loads for some of her work, and a flash that even through good optics in falling snow I could not cleanly catch, so that her shots arrived as effect without visible cause, a man simply ceasing across the bowl with no muzzle bloom to backtrack. To hunt a shooter you backtrack the flash to the firer. She had taken the flash away. She had, in effect, removed the one piece of evidence my whole method depended on, and left me hunting a ghost by inference alone, by the geometry of where the dead were falling, and the cruel triangulation of working backward from 3 corpses to the one cold point from which all 3 lines of death could have been drawn. I want to tell you how good I had to be just to stay in the same fight as her, because it is the only honest way to make you feel her size. I worked it like a problem on a board. A man falls there, struck from that angle, draw the line back. Another falls there, that angle, draw the line. Two lines cross in a region of the shoulder. A third man falls, a third line, and it passes through the same region. And now I have not a point but a small zone, and I put my scope on that zone and I read it inch by inch in the snowlight for the shape that does not belong, the straight edge in a world of broken edges, the patient flat of a barrel where there should be only stone and drift. And I found her. After the better part of an hour, working at the very top of my craft, against an enemy who had done everything possible to deny me exactly this, I found the place where she was. And the moment I was sure of it, the moment I had her, scope on the zone, finger taking up the first pressure on a shot I had earned through an hour of the hardest tracking I have ever done, she was already gone, not fleeing. Gone the way she was always gone, because she had fired her shots from that place and moved before I closed the loop, displacing on her own schedule and not on my discovery of her, so that my hour of brilliance brought me to a warm, empty scrape, exactly the way the sweep's rush had. And the only difference between me and the frightened men who had blundered up that slope was that I understood, kneeling at the empty scrape with my heart going, precisely how completely I had been beaten. And they had only felt it. She had not even known I was hunting her. That is what I have had to live with. I was the best my side had. I gave her the whole strength of my craft for an hour, and she dealt with me without ever, as far as I can tell, specifically registering me as a distinct threat. I was simply one more piece of the geometry she had already solved, one more reason the position she had chosen had 3 covered fallbacks instead of 2. I had brought a knife to a fight against someone who had stopped thinking about knives a long time ago. The deep cold came in the dead middle hours, when even a fight slows because the body can only burn so hard for so long against that kind of temperature. And I learned later again from the hide, from what she left, from the small frozen evidences of how a human being keeps a hand alive in that cold, what those hours cost her. There were the marks in the snow where she had warmed her firing hand against her own body between shots. Fingers worked one at a time so the trigger finger would keep its honesty. There was the place she had eaten, a little cold, because a shooter who does not eat begins to shake from more than cold, and a shooter who shakes cannot hold. And even her body she treated as one more piece of equipment to be managed against the task. There was the evidence that she had, at least once, lain so still for so long that the snow had begun to bury her, and had let it, had used it, become adrift with a barrel, because the falling snow that tormented every other shooter in that valley was to her one more ally she had decided to keep. The shots kept coming through those hours, spaced now, patient, each one chosen. She was no longer disassembling a trap that was already broken. She had moved into the second phase of her night, which was attrition with a purpose, keeping us off the bowl, keeping a lid on, making the cost of any rush down onto the fold higher than my commander was willing to pay, while the team below worked toward the only thing that could end the night well for them, which was a place flat and clear enough for the aircraft to come in when the weather lifted at dawn. She was buying them until dawn. That was the shape of it, and I saw the shape near the bottom of those cold hours, and seeing it I understood that she was not trying to win the battle. She had decided, all by herself, on the realistic victory, not to destroy us, which one shooter cannot do, but to keep 11 men alive across a fixed number of hours until the sky opened. And she was spending herself toward that exact, achievable, unglamorous end with a discipline that did not waver once across the whole night. She never overreached. She never took the greedy shot, the show-off shot, the one a lesser shooter takes because it is there. She took the shot the situation required and no other, and the restraint was as frightening as the marksmanship, because restraint is the thing you cannot train into a man who needs the fight to be about him. By the count I was keeping, she was past a dozen by then. 12 men of mine more, off the rim and the slope, taken in conditions I would have sworn no one alive could shoot in, by someone none of us had laid eyes on, while below her 11 men who had laughed at a qualification card learned, in the only school that teaches it, what they had actually been handed and had thrown away into the snow with a joke. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what it was like to be one of those 11 men in the fold through those middle hours, and Royce gave me enough later that I can tell it without inventing much. Picture it from inside the stone. You are pinned in the bottom of a bowl you walked into, the worst place a soldier can be, with high ground all around you and fire coming down off every side, and the first 10 minutes are the pure arithmetic of survival. Get behind the stone, find your sectors, count the wounded, do not panic. Do the things your training laid into your hands so deep that your hands do them while your mind is screaming. You expect in that situation only one direction for the night to go, and it is down. Encircled forces in a kill zone do not, as a rule, get to write a happy ending. They get to sell themselves dearly, and the men in the fold knew it, and they set about selling themselves dearly with the grim competence of professionals who have made their peace. And then the math starts coming out wrong, and that is its own strange terror, because a soldier learns to trust the math. The fire that should be increasing is decreasing. The gun on the south rim that had them dead to rights goes silent and does not come back. A marksman who had been walking rounds in closer and closer to the gap in their stone simply stops. The men in the fold are too busy and too pinned to understand it at first. They only feel the pressure easing in places it has no business easing, like a hand that was on your throat loosening one finger at a time for no reason you can see. Royce told me the first thing he felt was not hope but suspicion, that it was a trick, that the enemy was repositioning to hit them from a new angle, because, in his experience, fire only slackened when something worse was being set up. It took them precious minutes to let themselves believe the simpler and stranger thing, that someone, somewhere above them, was reaching into the ring from outside and pulling the teeth out of the trap one at a time. There is a discipline a team has to find in a moment like that to fight well around a gift they do not understand. They could have wasted the gift. They could have stayed hunkered behind their stone, riding out the lull, and let the chance she was buying them pass, and then her work would have been for nothing. 19 shots spent to preserve men who would not move. They did not waste it. That is to their credit, and it is the part of the story the men themselves are proudest of, that once they understood the rim was being cleared for them, they used it. They read which guns had gone quiet, and they moved in those windows, bounding men up out of the bottom of the bowl toward the high lip on the side she had cleared, dragging their wounded, fighting up out of the grave a meter at a time through doors that kept opening in the wall of fire as if some hand were opening them, which was exactly what was happening. A rescue is not one person's work even when one person makes it possible. She opened the doors. They had to walk through them, under fire, carrying their hurt, and they did, and the two halves of it, her shooting and their moving, fit together across that whole night without a single word passing between the shoulder and the fold. Two disciplines meshing in the dark by nothing but a shared understanding of the work. And I have always found that the most haunting thing of all, that she and they fought the same fight in perfect concert and never spoke, never could have spoken, were strangers who had laughed at each other a day before and would never meet again. And up on my rim, through those same hours, I was learning the private lesson that has reorganized everything I believe about my old trade. I had always been taught and had always believed, and had built my whole self around believing, that the apex of a shooter is speed and reach and nerve, the ability to make the hardest shot fastest and feel nothing. I had measured myself my whole life on that ladder, and I had climbed near the top of it, and I had been proud. That night hunting her, I watched someone operate by a completely different measure, and I understood near dawn that my ladder had been the wrong ladder, that it measured the thing that does not finally matter. She was not faster than me. In the open, in daylight, on a flat range, side by side, I do not actually know that she would have beaten me on raw speed, and I say that not to flatter myself but because it is the point. She did not win by being faster. She won by needing the fight to be about the task and not about herself, and that one difference of orientation, which has nothing to do with the hands and everything to do with what a person has emptied out of themselves, beat the best night I ever had so completely that she did it without knowing my name. The ladder I had climbed measured how dangerous a man could be. Hers measured how completely a person could disappear into a purpose, and the second is a far higher and far colder thing, and I had never once, in all my training, been taught that it existed. It was Karim who found her. I have to tell this part, and I have put off telling it, because Karim was 19 years old and the best young eyes on our side, and he found her by doing the one thing I had not done, which was to stop thinking like a shooter and start thinking like prey. I had been hunting her by her shots, by where the dead fell, by the geometry of the lines. Karim, who was young enough to still be afraid in the simple animal way that I had trained out of myself, asked a different question. He did not ask where she was shooting from. He asked where, on that whole white shoulder, a person could lie that would let her see everything she clearly could see: the bowl, the slope, the throat, the fallback ground, while staying alive and supplied across a whole night. He thought not about the shots, but about the life behind the shots, the eating and the warming and the moving and the resting. And he narrowed the shoulder not to where a bullet had come from, but to where a human being could survive and work for 9 hours. And that is a much smaller piece of ground. And in the gray just before dawn, when the snow thinned for the first time all night, and the light came up flat and shadowless off the white, he saw it. A line that was too straight, a drift with an edge a drift should not have. He did not fire, he was a spotter, not a shooter, and to his lasting credit, he did the disciplined thing and did not waste the surprise on his own inferior shot. He brought it to me. He put my hand on the rifle and my eye where his eye had been, and he breathed the range and the hold into my ear the way a good spotter does. And there, at last, after a whole night, I had her in my scope, truly had her. The small flat purpose of her against the snow, the shape of the back of a person lying perfectly still behind a weapon, 210 meters down and across the shoulder from us. Unaware, I was certain that she had finally been seen. I had the shot. I want you to understand that. After everything, I had the clean shot on the ghost, the shot that would end the night and save what was left of my side and write my name into the kind of legend that men in my old world tell. I settled. I read Karim's wind. I took up the pressure. And in the half-second before I would have broken the trigger, she moved. Not because she had seen me. I am sure to this day she had not seen me. She moved because it was time, on her own clock, to displace again. Because she had fired her last shots from that scrape, and her own iron discipline said leave before they find this one. And so she rose out of the snow she had become and flowed down into the dead ground toward her next position. And my perfect shot broke into the place where she had been a half-second before, and struck nothing but the cooling print of her body. She had beaten me without knowing I was there. Again, for the last time, I did not get another. By the time the snow she had displaced through gave her up to view, she was into her fallback ground, into the depth she had built for herself days before, into the cached ammunition and the chosen routes, and the gray was coming up fast now. And with the gray came the sound that ended all our hunting, the sound my commander had feared, and the 11 men in the fold had been buying themselves toward all night long. The deep beat of rotors, far off and climbing closer, the aircraft coming in on the lifting weather to take the team out. What happened in that last half hour I can only give you in pieces, because it was chaos and dawn and my side was coming apart, but the pieces are enough. My commander, seeing the aircraft inbound and the night's killing slip through his hands, did the desperate thing, the thing she had spent the whole night making too expensive and now, with dawn and extraction at hand, could no longer prevent. He committed what he had left to a rush down into the bowl, to overrun the fold and finish the team before the helicopters could land and lift them, to salvage a victory from the ruin of the trap. Men poured down off the rim toward the 11 in the stone. And she met them. This was the only stretch of the night where she shot fast, and she shot fast because the situation finally required it, and not a second before 11 men in the open of the fold, my men rushing down on them, the aircraft flaring in, and a window of perhaps 2 minutes in which everything she had spent the night preserving could still be lost. So she stopped being patient, because patience was no longer the work. Speed was the work now, and she could do that too. from her fallback ground with her cached rounds, into the thin dawn light where at last she did not have full dark to hide in. She took the rushing men off the slope as fast as a human being can work a bolt and stay precise. And each shot found the man most dangerous to the fold at that instant. And the rush, 40 men's worth of fury and momentum and the last chance of a night's work, broke against 11 survivors and one shooter on a shoulder, and stalled, and turned, and fell back up the slope it had come down, leaving its dead on the snow. The aircraft touched. The 11 came out of the fold and across the open to the ramps, carrying their wounded, moving in the disciplined bounds of men who have been kept alive past all reason and mean to honor it by not dying in the last 50 meters. And over them, all the way, the shoulder kept firing, covering them, killing the few of my men who rose to fire on the loading, holding the lid on for the last 2 minutes the way she had held it for 9 hours, until the last man was up the ramp, and the aircraft lifted and turned its belly to the rim and clawed up into the gray and was gone. 19. That was the count when the shooting stopped, and I trust the count because it was mine, kept all night, each one a wound to my side that I had felt land. 19 confirmed in that cold, in that dark, in that wind, alone, off a hide she had built in advance, on behalf of men who had laughed at her. I have never before or since seen anything like it, and I have looked in the years after through every record I could reach for another night like that one, and I have not found it. There may be shooters who could match 1 or 2 of the conditions she beat. I do not believe there has been one who beat all of them at once, that long, that disciplined, for that purpose. I was there. I am telling you, there has not. We did not find her. When my people finally went up onto the north shoulder in the full light, after the aircraft were long gone and the fight was over and lost, they found the story I have been telling you written in the snow. The hide, the warm scrapes, the 3 fallback positions, the empty caches, the marks where a hand had been warmed and a body had eaten and a person had lain so still the snow had tried to bury her and she had let it. They found 19 reasons, scattered across the rim and the slope, why the trap had failed. They found everything except her. She had walked out the way she had done everything else, on her own clock, by a route chosen days before, into the white, and she was gone before we knew the fight was over, the way she had been gone from every position the instant after she had used it. I want to come back now to the end of the team's radio log, because there is one more transmission on it, and it is the one that this whole story has been walking toward. And it was logged at the moment the aircraft cleared the rim with all 11 men aboard, and the shoulder finally went silent. Captain Hale's voice, the man who had let the joke run, the man who had sent her up to count snowflakes, and what he says into his own net with his whole team alive around him in the bay of a climbing aircraft because of a person he had benched, is not a report and it is not an order. It is a question asked of the empty net, of the snow, of the shoulder falling away below them, of a woman who could not hear it and would never hear it. He keys the radio and he says, and the log records it, and a survivor read it to me years later with his own voice breaking. Overwatch, what's your call sign? And of course there is no answer. There was never going to be an answer. She was a kilometer away by then, walking out into the white, and even if she had heard him, I do not think she would have keyed up, because the answer was never the point to her. She had not stayed up on that shoulder all night for a call sign or for his question or for anything he could give her. But the question is the whole reversal in 4 words, and you can hear it if you have ears for it. The man who had reduced her to a card on a corkboard, who had let her read her own classification to a laughing room, and then sent her away to be safe and useless, was now asking, with everything he had, to be told the name of the person who had saved his life and the lives of all his men, was asking for the very thing he had thrown away, the knowledge of who she was, the respect he had not spent a single ounce of awkwardness to give her in the warm hut a day before. He had had the answer pinned to a board by the door, and he had laughed at it. Now he was at 30 meters and climbing, and he would have given a year of his life to have it back. The salute I did not see. I have to be honest with you about that, because I have been honest with you about everything else, and because the temptation in a story like this is to put yourself at the scene of the grace you did not earn the right to witness. I was on the wrong side of that valley. I was a beaten man kneeling in the snow of a lost fight, and the men she saved were climbing into the sky away from me. The salute happened far from me, days later and a world away from that cold shoulder, and I know it only because I made it my business in the years after to find out what became of the 11 and the woman who kept them. And because one of those 11, it was Royce, the sergeant, the one who laughed first and tried to stop it and then prayed into the net, became, by a long road I will not detail, a man I could write to. And he told me. He told me because he had carried it for years the way I had carried my side of it, and we were, the two of us, the only people each of us had ever found who fully understood what had happened on that shoulder, an enemy and a saved man, the only two who had been weighed against her and knew our true weight. Here is what Royce told me, and I give it to you as nearly as I can in the shape he gave it to me. When the team got back down out of the mountains and the operation was closed and the cold was behind them, they learned, in the flat administrative way that such things are learned, who had been attached to them. The office that never explained anything explained this once just enough. They learned the call sign, Whitehorn. They learned what it meant in the small closed world of people who do that work. That she was not a shooter but the shooter, the standard the others were held against, the holder of a long-range mark in conditions that the men reading the file had to read twice to believe, the one they sent alone to the high cold places because she was the only one who could be trusted to do alone, in the worst the world could offer, what whole teams could not reliably do together. They learned that the woman they had made read her qualification card aloud to a laughing room had a record, sealed and thin on the outside and staggering underneath, of having done what she did on that shoulder before, in other valleys, for other men who also had not known what they had until the snow gave it back to them. And they learned that she would not be at the gathering. She never came to such things. That was part of what she was. She did the work and she went back into the white, and she did not stay for the part where they would have stood her up in front of the formation and pinned something to her chest, because the staying was never the point and the chest was already full of the only thing that mattered to her, which was the knowledge, carried quietly home, that 11 men were alive who would not have been. She did not need them to salute her. That is the thing the room in the hut had been too small to see, that her not needing their respect was not the same as not deserving it, that the two had nothing to do with each other, that she had walked out into the snow to count their snowflakes precisely because she had stopped, long ago, needing to be in the room when the respect arrived. But it arrived. Royce told me how. There was no grand parade. This was not that kind of work. There was a morning at the staging hut weeks later, when a small element went back up to recover gear and close the site, and Royce was among them, and Hale led them. And when they came into that stone hut with the iron stove, the first thing any of them saw, still pinned to the corkboard by the door where Petty had put it as a joke, frozen and curled at the corners but unmistakable, was her qualification card. No one had taken it down. It had hung there through the whole operation, through the night on the shoulder, through everything, the small mean joke left pinned where a laughing man had pinned it. And now 11 men, or the few of them in that recovery element, stood in the doorway and looked at it, and the hut was very quiet, and the stove was cold. And Hale crossed the room to it. Royce said he will remember as long as he lives the way the captain crossed that room, slow, in the particular silence of a man arriving at the true size of a thing he had been too comfortable to measure when measuring would have cost him something. Hale stood in front of the card a long moment. And then, and this is the part Royce's letter could barely hold, the ink pressed hard into the paper here as if he had to bear down to write it. Captain Hale came to attention in front of a curled paper card pinned to a corkboard in an empty hut, and he raised his hand, and he held the slow full salute you give the colors, the salute you give the fallen, the salute a soldier gives to the thing larger than himself that he has finally understood he was in the presence of, and he held it to a piece of paper. to an absent woman, to the card he had let a man pin up as a joke while he watched and said nothing. And then, one by one, without an order, because no order could have produced it and no order was needed, the men behind him came to attention too, and raised their hands, and the empty hut filled with men saluting a qualification card. That is the salute. It happened in a cold room she was not in, to a card she had handed over without a fight, in front of a stove gone out, and there was no one there to receive it but the men who had finally been made to give it, and that, I have come to think, is the truest kind there is, the kind given when the person who earned it will never know and could not have cared less, given not to satisfy her but to repair the men who give it, because a salute like that is not a gift to the saluted. It is a confession by the saluting. It is a room of men saying with their bodies, in the only language soldiers fully trust, "We were wrong, we were small, we were handed a master and we made her read her card aloud, and we are ashamed, and this is the only currency we have to pay it back with, and we know it is not enough, and we are paying it anyway." Petty was not on that recovery element. Royce did not say why and I did not ask, but Royce told me one more thing, the last thing, and it is where I will end, because it is where the story ended for the men who lived it. They did not take the card down. They left it pinned to the board. Hale gave the order, the only order in the whole business, and the right one at last, that the card was to stay, that the site was to be closed around it, that no one was to touch it. And so somewhere up in that high cold country, in a stone hut at the mouth of a valley that nearly became a grave for 11 men, there is, or there was, a curled qualification card pinned to a corkboard by a door, the small mean joke that a frightened laughing room made of a master left up on purpose now, by men who finally understood it, as the closest thing they could build to a monument in the one place that would mean anything, to the woman who had counted their snowflakes and kept them all alive. I have carried my own version of that salute for a long time now, from the far side, the enemy's side, the losing side, and I will give it to you here because I have no card to pin and no hut to leave it in, and these pages are the only board I have. I was the most dangerous shooter in that valley by every measure I had ever been given, and I was not fit to spot for her. I hunted her all night at the very top of my craft, and she beat me without ever learning my name. She taught me in 9 hours of cold, the one thing my instructors with all their decimals never could, that the deadliest thing on any field is not the fastest hand or the longest shot or the coldest heart, but a person who has made herself completely equal to a single hard task and has emptied out of herself everything that is not that task. The vanity, the need to be seen, the hunger for the room's respect, the haste, the fear. She had emptied all of it. There was nothing left in her for me to frighten or to find. There was only the task, and the patience that was not the part before the task but was the task itself, and the 19, and the white she walked out into when it was done. I do not know her name. I never will. The men she saved did not know it either when they laughed at her, and I think she preferred it that way, preferred to be a card on a board and a curse on a frightened net and a print cooling in the snow a half-second ahead of every shot fired at her. They called her Whitehorn, the men who feared her. The men she saved learned to salute an empty hut. And I, who hunted her and lost, have spent the years since learning to say the only true sentence I have about that night. The sentence I could not have said in the warm certainty before the first shot came out of the snow behind me, and that I have never doubted since. I was there the night the best of us met the better of her, and she was not even trying to beat me. She was only counting snowflakes, the way they told her to, and keeping 11 men alive while she did it.